The Anabar Plateau, an ancient little-known mountainous country. This is a lost world far in the north of central Siberia. Audiences may already know a few things about the incredible Putaran Plateau. However, few people know the Anabar Plateau, which is located next to it. From the north is the tundra, from the south is the boundless taiga or boreal forest, from the west is the Putaran Plateau. This territory is part of the Taimyr district of the Krasnoyarsk territory and Yukatia. Some of the most mysterious areas of Russia's north and its Arctic lands. Lands of ancient radioactive cauldrons, tales of ancient aliens, ancient iron fish lurking in the waters, and ubiquitous UFOs hovering over frozen territories for millennia. But the two plateaus, they're special in their own ways. The Anabar Plateau is absolutely an ideal wilderness. Here, the clean air of the early morning flows into the body with coolness. There are not so many places left on Earth that are completely untouched by human activity. There are no roads, no people, or settlements for hundreds of kilometers. Here, in the undivided and boundless silence of the surrounding space, you can hear how the blood pulsates through the vessels and how thoughts fly through your head. The Anabar Plateau is called an open-air museum of the geological history of the Earth. It has stones, water and sparse vegetation, deer, wolves, hares, whitefish, grilling diamond, peregrine falcons and gulls. Perhaps this is all that can be found on a short trip to the Anabar Plateau, not counting the most beautiful views, except for the unexplained phenomena. The Anabar Plateau is a unique place in Russia. The history of the Russian exploration of the Taimyr expanses, the North Siberian lowland, and the Middle Siberian plateaus began at the end of the first or at the beginning of the second decade of the 17th century. But there were people or other sentient beings here way before. In accessible places of the plateau, you can stumble upon ancient ruins with megalithic masonry foundations, the blocks of which overlap each other, and they partially preserve the remains of carvings almost erased by time. All this and much more is still waiting for its researchers, real researchers, not tourists. The Anabar Plateau is securely hidden from the outside world. This is one of the wildest places on the planet. There are mountains scattered across the vast expanse, suspiciously resembling the ruins of ancient temples. Rare photographs of the Anabar Plateau amaze the imagination and raise many questions. Take a look at these photos. Scientists believe that these are only natural formations. However, most of it looks like a destroyed and scorched city with the remains of buildings. The Ko-Tui-Kan River originates on the Anabar Plateau. On the banks of the Ko-Tui-Kan and other rivers, there are simply fantastic-looking rocks. On the plateau, the mountain surfaces have a mostly smooth landscape. There are no severe, sharp elevations. It's clear that glaciers have worked through here in the past, and only where the rivers cut a canyon for themselves, bizarre rocks are exposed. Many kilometers of stone stretch along the coast, among which sharp rocks like peaks soar into the air, resembling medieval cities built up with stone in the Gothic style. Of course, according to the official scientific theory, these bizarre columns of the ancient Acropolis are the result of the work of water, the frost, sun, wind, and so on. As well as everywhere else, however, there's always at the adamant party line. Scientists are forbidden to think about ancient civilizations, but no one will forbid everyone else. People can think for themselves. In general, there are accounts that there were a certain number of previous civilizations on our planet before our civilization came to be. For example, the Tibetan Lamas believe that ours is the 23rd civilization in a row. There are hypotheses that so-called guests also arrived from outer space, from China to Central Asia to Georgia to Armenia and other parts of the world. Some of them diligently fought each other with different types of weapons. In addition, various cataclysms periodically occurred on Earth. For example, the tilt of the axis changed, causing floods, earthquakes, and so on. Therefore, civilizations eventually perished, leaving only ruins behind. For several centuries, researchers and adventurers have been looking for traces of ancient civilizations, and in Africa too, there are researchers actively seeking evidence. Some are also found in the Amazon jungle, the caves of Tibet, the pyramids of Egypt. So those who look for ancient civilizations rarely, if ever, are interested in northern Siberia and the shelf of the Arctic Ocean, and yet those places keep the answers to many secrets of the past. For example, Putaran Plateau is a huge mountainous country in the north of the Krasnoyarsk territory. Its territory is comparable in size to the United Kingdom and is located east of the Yenisei River Valley, southwest of the Anabar Plateau, north of the Severman-Tangauskas Plateaus, and south of the North Siberian lowland. The plateau was once actively developed by more advanced civilizations. This is evidenced by numerous finds, information about which sometimes becomes public. There's masonry, the remains of colonnades, processed megalithic blocks, remains of statues, man-made caves, and much more. And of course, there are structures that look like pyramids, ruins of ancient buildings, and other traces of ancient civilizations are found. Not only in many valleys of the plateau, but there are many structures on its flat peaks stretching over vast expanses. Nowadays, they're sometimes covered with thick vegetation, and huge areas represent lifeless stone rock wastelands. Apparently, the active development of these places by people took place when it was warmer. The surface of the plateau was covered with forests, and to determine the time affiliation of all of these finds and to find out who these unknown builders were is a matter for the future. In the meantime, official science ignores all of these structures, but maybe it's for the best. Our civilization is not ready for some people. That's their opinion, to gain access to the secrets of ancient peoples, and therefore they should remain so until the right time comes. There is the so-called Shaitan or Devil Mountain that has always been considered by the local population as a place of great power. The Ave Inc., a local people, have shamans that lived and performed ceremonies at its base. Various rituals were held next to it. It was under its slopes, according to the stories of the old-timers in the 1930s and 40s of the 20th century, that the Ave Inc. of this area lived out her life on a plateau above the Shaitan Mountain. Ruins of ancient megalithic structures are on top, with the remains of carvings to be found in the mountainside, and in clear weather you can see the face of Shaitan, actually a human face in a huge semi-profile. It's possible that this is a game of nature, but it looks too much like an energetically powerful face that has been revered since ancient times, right up to a few years ago. After another collapse, a tunnel opened on the mountainside that led deep into the mountain, but later, when trying to get inside, another internal collapse filled up the passage, although the contours of the hole are still clearly visible. Then there are the legendary pyramids of Putaran. These are triangular in shape and are large in size, about 450 to 500 meters high, and one of the smallest is about 200 meters. The absence of terraces charismatic of Putaran is unusual in these places. People observe very unusual phenomena during Christmas. Almost every evening in one of the frozen 100-meter waterfalls, rotating concentric circles rise from the ground into the sky, forming a giant luminous spiral. The phenomenon exists for no more than 15 minutes, after which the spiral fades and dissolves into the dark. According to the legend preserved by many generations of the indigenous inhabitants of northern Siberia and local spiritual leaders, who are usually disparagingly called shamans and healers, intelligent life has existed on our planet for many hundreds of thousands of years. In ancient times, there were powerful civilizations, some of which perished due to disasters. About 40,000 years ago, one of these world wars took place on Earth between the states located on two continents. Today, they are known as the legendary Hyperborea and Atlantis. The use of some super-powerful weapons led to huge destruction, geological and climatic changes. People belonging to the two branches of the single super ethnicity were forced to look for new habitats. The Indo-Europeans from Atlantis and from Hyperborea had to explore the expanses of other continents, so the Indo-Europeans found themselves in North Africa, America, near Asia, in the Urals, in Siberia, including the Putaran Plateau. But Atlantis, having decreased in size, was preserved only on a relatively small island in the Western Ocean. Meanwhile, the confrontation continued. Its culmination was the fall of a giant cosmic body, celestial body, 12,000 years ago in the area of the modern Atlantic. A new global catastrophe, the rise of the waters of the world ocean rose by more than 100 meters. The ancients who managed to foresee the natural cataclysm, as the legend says, even before the events began, built special stone structures, special storages, and entire underground cities deep underground on the Putaran Plateau, where they hid everything most important to their civilization: cultural values, some artifacts testifying to their origins from outer space, and the knowledge about previous terrestrial civilizations. This Siberian legend is similar, by the way, to the Buddhist myth about the departure of an entire people underground in the north of Siberia. In connection with the legends about the secrets of Putaran and their secret keepers, we can mention a strange fact in the biography of Joseph Djugashvili, the Soviet dictator better known as Joseph Stalin. Despite his tendency to escape for some reason, he conscientiously served exile in the foothills of the Putaran Plateau from 1914 to 1917. He was in the so-called Ruhanskar exile. At the same time, he himself chose Koyakar as the place to serve his sentence. This was, of course, under the old Russian Empire. Alone, according to the Russian researcher George Sidar-Roth, Stalin disappeared for months into the foothills of Putaran and on the other tributaries of the Yenisei River. No one knows what he did there, and the leader preferred not to share with anyone about this period of his reclusive life. This was a very interesting period of his life which we don't know anything about, and in the most interesting place. In northern Siberia, there are also legends about the Golden Woman associated with the secrets of the same Putaran Plateau and the local spiritual leaders. Many traditions of the northern peoples are connected with the Putaran Plateau that say somewhere here the legendary Golden Woman is hidden. This was an idol made of gold, a pagan shrine of the Siberians that was hunted by various researchers and adventurers and the Ave Inks Guard, according to legend. In the epic of the northern peoples, many legends related to the Putaran Plateau have been preserved. The country of eternal darkness and death was often called Putaran by the inhabitants of the tundra, the Ninyets Dolgans and Ganasans. They very rarely came here without extreme need to be here, and only the Ave Inks actually mastered almost the entire area of the plateau. They had been the keepers of the secrets of Putaran. For the past centuries, the study of the Putaran Plateau began only in the 1940s, 50s of the 20th century, maybe a little bit earlier. Until then, even maps of this area didn't exist. Lama, for example, appeared on maps in the late 1930s of the 20th century. A few expeditions passed through, and after a short time they left, leaving the plateau alone, and there have never been any permanent settlements of the mainland people in this area. By the way, Russian ufologists consider Putaran as a kind of Mecca. They are assured that in this land, as nowhere else, there are direct communications with unearthly forces available. In confirmation of their correct assumptions, they usually point to the round pits, which are found in large numbers in the plateau. They can be found on the banks of the river, and the locals say there are places where nothing grows, where there are no traces of animals, very bad places, and they bypass such anomalies, they do not travel there. Scientists who have seen these basins or round pits only spread their hands around, meaning they're not sure about them, and of course expressing various assumptions. One of the long-time researchers of the mysteries of the Putaran Plateau is Valentin Solomchikov. He's a Russian science candidate of physical and mathematical sciences, an expert in ufology and anomalous phenomena. During one of his expeditions to the plateau, he met with an unusual phenomenon, and here is his report. Our equipment cannot be kept in a tent. Diesel is always rumbling nearby to power the equipment. We look out of our trailer only when the devices begin to show all sorts of devilry. Suddenly there's an aurora or a borealis, or even rarer, red haze outside. The scientist recalls the circumstances of his unexpected contact with the unknown. I did not expect to see anything interesting when the equipment went haywire. I got out of my house, which sadly stood on a deserted Siberian plateau 40 kilometers from the only nearest human habitation, a weather station. It was already dark. A misty haze began to rise from a small lowland. The breeze carried the fog in my direction, and soon the red beacon that I lit and the mast of the wind generator was no longer visible from the air. I returned to the house for a flare gun, and I found that the recorder was doing something strange. It had some interference, and when I got out again, I saw an unusual sight in the approaching fog wall. A chain of dull red spheres, one after another, emerging from the fog and then disappearing into it. It was as if the spheres were on some huge invisible disc, because this strange dance did not think to stop, and several dozen spheres had already passed or floated before my eyes. I had to go back to the house for binoculars, and by this time the spheres had significantly dimmed, completely being in a foggy haze. So I didn't see any details. It even gave the impression that it was the fog that extinguished this light. Finally, the phenomenon ended. I timed it, and it turned out that the electromagnetic interference also ended about the same time. However, their nature remained unclear, whether they were generated by the spheres themselves or some tectonic process that gave rise to them. According to Salam Chivkov, for a long time he didn't encounter anything similar to this phenomenon in the literature devoted to paranormal phenomena, although pilots at altitude have repeatedly encountered garlands of fireballs. There's no rational scientific explanation for such phenomena, there is only the mystical. For example, witnesses in another Russian area claim that they sometimes saw a glowing human figure next to the spheres, and Kostroma children were once brought home by such a fireball or a sphere, unanimously claimed that they were led out of the forest by a glowing woman with a burning lamp. Alas, none of the adults saw this woman, but it's well known that young children often see ghosts, apparitions, and phantoms of dead people. There is no other explanation for the behavior of the luminous spheres. As yet, according to Solomchikov, however, the UFO garlands have been sighted in Kazakhstan, as well as strange spheres reported not far from the Khatanga in 1970s, but that's not far from these two plateaus. Any attempt to land on the way on the Anabar Plateau is only by helicopter. Geologists who come here to study rocks created a geochronological scale of rocks of 5 billion years, from the Cryptozoic to the Cenozoic era. The age of the rocks allows us to study the geographical history of the Earth. Geologically, the Anabar Plateau is unique. The Anabar Shield, which geographically coincides with the Anabar Plateau, is built by the so-called Precambrian rocks. Here, some of the most geologically ancient rocks come to the surface, Proterozoic and Archean having the age of 1.6 to 2 billion years old respectively. From 3 to 5 billion years, the history of the formation of these rocks is described by geologists as follows. For millions of years, the Siberian platform drifted from the southern hemisphere of the Earth to its current position in the northern hemisphere. A warm ocean splashed over it for a long time, in which sea sediments of different geological eras or epochs accumulated. As a result of the rise of the ocean floor, the most ancient sedimentary rocks appeared on the surface precisely in the area of the Anabar Plateau. The Kotukan River has cut its valley in these rocks for millions of years and created one of the most majestic landscapes on Earth. The river has exposed geological layers to which you can read the history of the Earth and, like a time machine, get access to billions of years in the past. There are giant craters in the Russian north, just like those all over the Earth, caused by either falling meteorites or from nuclear bombs from the past that we don't know anything about. On the Anabar Plateau near the Popigai River, there's the Popigai crater with a diameter of 100 kilometers. Of course, it's impossible to see the crater even from a helicopter, but the bottom of the crater is 200 meters below the surrounding area. The edges are eroded, and geologists suggest that about 35 million years ago, a celestial body about 6 to 8 kilometers in diameter crashed there. The industrial diamonds left behind as a result of the powerful impact were a state secret in the USSR and modern Russia. In the 1970s and 1990s of the 20th century, quite a lot of tourist groups were brought to the Puturam Plateau every year. There were many hunting and fishing places for them to seek, but due to the constant increase in tariffs for helicopters, the only transport available to the vast majority of the plateau, the flow of tourists has sharply decreased. Fishing points have been abandoned, and a huge part of the plateau has become completely deserted. Many valleys have not been visited by people for centuries. The Puturam Plateau is one of the very few completely underdeveloped and almost deserted places on our planet, and the plateau is indeed a difficult place to reach. But not wanting to exaggerate, it is much more difficult and expensive to get there, for example, to the center of the Taimyr Peninsula or some point of the mainland Arctic. But of course, most of them are closed to foreigners because of the strategically important military installations and facilities, and there are simply no regular tours for tourists there. But in other places of the Arctic, there are many of them. On the Puturam Plateau, access is only granted to the western part, the protected zone of the Puturam Reserve, so much for the inaccessibility. Tour operators do their best to explore the aura of mystery and inaccessibility of the Puturam Plateau, selling tours to a couple of well-known, well-maintained bases in the western part of the plateau. The remoteness from civilization, the pristine nature of the plateau, and some marketing do the job, and they bring tourists. There are a huge number of waterfalls on the plateau. The most interesting ones are located deep inside the reserve and are accessible to comfort lovers only by helicopter. This dramatically reduces the anthropogenic load or human impact on the area. Fortunately, the Puturam Reserve occupies a significant part of the Puturam Plateau. Entry is prohibited there without a permit, but the protected area of the nature reserve is open for visiting. Even though it's not as strict as the main territory, such a visit must be coordinated. It's remarkable that there is no infrastructure for tourists on the central part of the plateau. All programs and development plans relate only to the protected area of the reserve in the western part of the plateau, accessible by rivers and lakes from Norilsk. For foreigners, it's almost impossible to get into Norilsk. Sadly, tourism everywhere shows that mass tourism is harmful to nature. The Puturam Plateau has many lakes, rivers and canyons. It has the largest number of waterfalls in Russia. Puturam lakes are mostly isolated from the outside world, and the fish in each of them differs from the fish of neighboring reservoirs. Now, just imagine what else the plateaus hide and what could be located in the halls of the inaccessible lands. Maybe we'll find out one day if there's a concentrated research effort by those who keep their minds open and by scientists who want to get to the bottom of the mystery. The Great Arctic Nature Reserve, the largest in Russia and in Eurasia, was established in 1993. Its shores are washed by two seas of the Arctic Ocean, the Kara Sea and the Laptev Sea. The Puturam Nature Reserve was established in 1988. It's also one of the largest in Russia and is in the Arctic, in the middle part of the large mountainous country. The fabulous Puturam Plateau was by the time a nature reserve, whose entire territory was in the zone of continuous permafrost, became established in 1979. Those are very interesting areas and part of Russian history, of course. But before there was Russia, or even a hint of Russia, hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe more, there were definitely civilizations in the north of the country, of which supporting research identifies areas in the Urals and also strange artifacts.